Hello, ladies and gentlemen, once again. Today we're looking at who is Assyria. So we're interested in who modern Assyria is. That is, who is Assyria today. So that is the topic for our discussion. I should refresh your mind a bit. If you remember, in the introduction, I did allude to the fact that we talked about who Assyria is, and we're mostly concerned with the historical perspective. That is, we're looking at the ancient nation of Assyria and what it did to the Church of God. Of course, when we talk about the Church of God, we are referring to the two nations of Israel and Judah, because those are the nations that were considered as the Church of God in the Old Testament. Because the people from those two nations came from the 12 tribes of Jacob, and then later on, the nation that was initially ruled by Solomon and David was divided into the northern and the southern kingdom, comprising the two nations of Judah and Israel. In the course of time, these nations actually fell out. The intention of the confederacy that developed between the two nations, like I alluded to, was to topple the leadership in Judah, so that these two nations of Syria and Israel can come up with a puppet king or a puppet leader whom they were going to control and thus rule over Judah. But the Lord was not happy with the plan that these two nations had, and so he sent the predatory nation of Assyria to scatter the two nations, or bring them to an end, and their nations, or rather the people within those two nations, were scattered in the various provinces of the realm of Assyria. So up until this day, the two nations of Israel and Syria were never in existence. So in essence, what we're saying is that these nations are no longer in existence, even as we speak, according to what the Bible says, because their inhabitants were scattered all over the world, and they can't be found in any particular country which we can say this is the nation of Israel, or this is the nation of Syria. So the Bible tells us those nations are no more. I'm sure we are clear on this aspect. So we have the nation of Israel today. We should understand that those are just two tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and that is the nation that remained at that particular time. As to whether that is actually the nation that remained, that is not the essence of this presentation. The essence is just to show what Assyria is under the current setup, which nations comprise Assyria, and what relationship is there between Assyria and the Church of God, and how ultimately, or in the final analysis, this nation of Assyria is going to influence the Church of God. So essentially, this is what we're going to look at. Of course, I did allude to the Dark Ages of religion, that is during the papacy, or during the time when the papacy was actually ruling the world. And we know that at that particular time, the two nations of Israel and Judah actually developed. We had the Orthodox Christians, and we had the nominal Christians, and how the nominal Christians rose up against the Orthodox Christians. So in other words, we had both the nation of Judah and the nation of Israel, and we know that God's people were somehow affected because of the policies that were embraced during that particular time. And we saw the ascendancy of the papacy to power and the persecution of the Orthodox Christians during that particular time. So that in itself was actually pointing forward to what the nations are going to try to do again. And then we also need to understand that the Second World War is another aspect of prophecy that is prophesied in connection with the nation of Assyria. So this is what is going to be looked into in details in this particular presentation, so that we understand just how the nation of Assyria is connected with the Church of God, and how the history of the world is actually connected with the nation of Assyria. So this is what we're going to look at today. And we need to understand that we are looking at who is Assyria today in connection with the Western nations and their allies. So in other words, the Western nations and their allies are the ones that comprise Assyria today. But the details of this is going to be discussed in this presentation. And we are going to show why we believe that it is these Western nations and their allies that comprise Assyria today. Four nations typical of four other nations. So we're continuing with our topic of discussion for today. Who is Assyria today? That is, we're going to emphasize on or focus on Western nations and their allies. Shall we proceed? The lands Israel and Syria, which Judah abhorred, were to be forsaken of both their kings, that is, conquered by the king of Assyria. So this is a continuation of the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 7 and chapter 8. So in Isaiah, we find that these nations of Israel and Syria, which nations were abroad by the nation of Judah, were to be conquered by the king of Assyria. That is according to the prophecy that is in that book. And you know that this is what actually happened. So these nations were going to be conquered, and they were conquered actually by the king of Assyria. All four nations, the nations we are referring to are Judah, Israel, Syria, and Assyria, which were involved in this historical action, were typical of four others that were to arise sometime following Emmanuel's birth. For after his birth, Israel and Syria were to be conquered by Assyria. We understand that Christ was born long after the Old Testament nations of Syria and Israel were born. In fact, he was born during the times of the Roman Empire. That was long after the time when these things happened. That is the time when Israel and Syria were scattered by Assyria. So all these nations that I talked about in this prophecy were not in existence at that time. The only nation that was there was the nation of Judah, and it was brought back after serving for a long time during the Babylonian captivity. So you can actually see that it's not the same nations necessarily that are being talked about. But all these four nations are actually alluding to or referring to other nations that were going to be born after Christ was born. That is to say, during the Christian dispensation. So we're talking about four new nations, four different nations altogether, and not necessarily the old nations that existed before Christ was born. In other words, the Old Testament nations of Israel, Syria, Judah, and Assyria are just referring to other four nations that were going to develop in the course of history during the Christian dispensation or in the New Testament. So this is what we need to bear in mind for a start so that we understand what this lesson is all about. We need to make those connections if we are to follow this particular presentation. Gates shall be set wide open to your enemy. Nahum 3 verse 11 to 15. Thou, Assyria, also shall be drunken. Thou shalt be hid. Thou also shalt seek strength because of the enemy. All thy strongholds shall be like fig trees, with the first ripe figs. If they shall be shaken, they shall even fall into the mouth of the eater. We are told here that Assyria shall be drunken, that it shall be hid, and that it will look for strength because of the enemy. That is, there's a certain enemy that is going to develop, and this enemy will focus on destroying Assyria. So because of the enemy, Assyria is going to seek strength. And its strongholds are compared to fig trees with the first ripe figs. And that if such trees were shaken, so once the trees are shaken, their fruit will be shed, or they will drop, in other words. So this is telling us just how vulnerable Assyria is to the enemy who will develop in future. That is according to the prophecy that we have. Okay? So to be so vulnerable that whatever defenses it has put in place, whatever strongholds it has put up, are not going to help it much because it's compared to a fig tree with the first ripe figs. And if this tree is shaken, the first ripe figs can even fall off the tree because of the pressure of the shaking. So it is so vulnerable that there's nothing else it can do. It doesn't have much that it can do to defend or protect itself, in other words. Behold, thy people in the midst of thee are women. The gates of thy land shall be set wide open unto thine enemies. The fire shall devour thy bars. The people who reign in Assyria are compared to women. Whatever qualities women have are the qualities that the people of Assyria are said to have, because they are said to be women. And we are told, the gates of thy land shall be set wide open unto thine enemies. This is the further qualification of Assyria. It says that Assyria will open wide its doors to their enemies. And it goes on to say, the fire shall devour thy bars. Of late, we've heard so much about the conspiracy theories. We've heard so much about the deep government or the shadow government in the developed countries, especially in the USA and the European countries. I'm sure almost every one of us has come across such allegations on social media that there are certain organizations or certain groups of people who are controlling the entire world. And these people are actually at the helm of the developed countries, and they're actually controlling these countries, and they're the ones that are waging most of the wars that are being waged across the world, especially in the Middle East. This just gives us a glimpse of the fact that the nations that comprise Assyria, the Western nations and their allies, have actually opened their gates wide to their enemies, because whatever intentions these conspirators have are not for the best interests of the Western nations. In other words, these nations are just being used as tools, and they can be destroyed at will, because the ones who are controlling them do not have their interests at heart. We may see the government, but there is a deep government or the shadow government that is behind these governments, which are controlling these countries. And the Bible does point out that actually this is what will happen, because it says that it will open wide its gates to its enemies. That is what Assyria has done. And that is why the people who are controlling these nations cannot be regarded as the friends of these nations, but rather their enemies, because they're trying to pursue their interests, and they're using these countries as a means to achieve their objectives. They're not interested whether they are destroyed or they are not destroyed. So they are enemies. We can see that what is happening at the moment actually vindicates this prophecy. Draw the waters for the siege, fortify thy strongholds, go into clay and try the mortar, make strong the brick kiln. The brick kiln refers to the manufacturing plants. There shall the fire devour thee, the sword shall cut thee off, it shall eat thee up like the cankerworm. Make thyself many as the cankerworm, make thyself many as the locusts. It is not a good prophecy about Assyria. We are told that Assyria will be involved in manufacturing, and it will do a lot to strengthen its manufacturing base. And we are told that even as it does this, it actually shall be devoured by the fire, and that the sword shall cut it off. This is what the prophecy says. It goes on to say that it shall eat thee up like the cankerworm, and then it goes on to say, make thyself many as the cankerworm, make thyself many as the locusts. For those who studied the two major economic systems that we have in the world, that is, capitalism and communism, I'm sure you're going to bear with me that if there is an economic system that has done so much to make other nations adopt its policies and become capitalist nations, it is actually capitalism itself. We've seen how capitalism has influenced the world, and just how it has grown, how it spread to different countries all over the world. So as these countries conquer the world, even capitalism spread all over the world. You had democracy, you had capitalism, and you had Christianity spreading to different countries on the globe. So these nations actually multiplied through conquest, through colonialism, and through other means that include economic means. This we talk about the businesses that are involved in. We're talking about the multinational corporations, and we're also talking about trade generally as we know it. So these are some of the things that have made capitalism grow. So they've made themselves many as the conqueror. They've made themselves many as the workers. So capitalism is compared to the conqueror, is compared to the locust. And we know that the cankerworms and the locusts are destructive in nature. They destroy the crop. And once they are done, then they leave. So this is a picture that we're given of Assyria. That is what they do to other nations. And we are told that they're going to multiply. Because initially all we had was America and Great Britain as the main capitalists. But then you have other nations that have joined. So there are many. Now we even have NATO. There are all sorts of things that we may talk about. And we don't only have these nations in the Western world, but we also have other nations like Japan, we have South Africa, we have many other nations around the world that are regarded as capitalist. So that is how far or how big capitalism has become. So all these are forming part of the cankerworms and the locusts that have been talked about in this prophecy. And we're being reminded that actually these nations are doomed to destruction, according to Nahum chapter 3, verse 11 to 15, which we've just looked at. The bloody city. Nahum 3, verse 1 to 4. Woe to the bloody city! It is all full of lies and robbery. The prey departeth not. The noise of a whip, and the noise of the rattling of the wheels, and of the prancing horses, and of the jumping chariots. We're given the picture of a bloody city here. And we're told that this bloody city is full of lies and robbery. We are told the prey departs not. That is how the bloody city is described. It even has prey in it. It's full of lies and robbery. Some of the most violent nations in the world are actually capitalist nations. And if there are nations that have preyed on other nations, it is the capitalist nations. And this bloody city has been singled out as the one in which the prey is found. A city from which the prey departs not. We are further taught that there is a noise of a whip. When we talk about a whip, it can be an instrument of subjugation. It can be an instrument of violence, an instrument of suppression. So in this city, there is the noise of a whip. There's also the noise of the rattling of the wheels. And the wheels associated with the traffic that is found in these cities, the vehicular traffic, can be the horses. Okay? So you have the noise of the rattling of the wheels that are found in the various vehicles that are found in these locations, and of the prancing horses, and of the jumping chariots. So all these means of transportation, all these vehicles or vehicular traffic are found within this particular bloody city. The horseman lifteth up both the bright sword and the glittering spear, and there is a multitude of slain, and a great number of carcasses, and there is none end of their corpses. They stumble upon their corpses. We're still talking about the bloody city, and the horseman emerges, and we're told that this horseman lifts up both the bright sword and the glittering spear. So they don't just have instruments of war or weapons that they can use in face-to-face combat. They also have weapons that they can throw from a great distance. And the intention is to kill. And we are taught that there is a multitude of slain. So many people are killed within this bloody city, or by this bloody city. And a great number of carcasses. There are so many dead bodies. And we are told there is no end to their carcasses. They stumble upon their corpses. So, the owners or the inhabitants of this bloody city are savages. They've killed so many people to an extent where they can actually stumble. They actually stumble upon their corpses. So this is just giving us a view of the battlefield. So it talks about the wars that are perpetrated by the bloody city. And apparently, this bloody city is found in Assyria. And the city that is being referred to is the city of Nineveh in antitypical Assyria. Because of the multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot. Did you get that? The multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot. So, this harlot is a well-favored one. And we are told the reason why so many people have died, the reason why there is so much bloodshed, is because of the whoredom of the well-favored harlot. And when we talk about whoredom in a spiritual sense, it simply talks about false religion. It talks about the tendency to frequent or patronize false religions or the oracles of the devil. And you're told the mistress of witchcrafts. So the well-favored harlot is actually the mistress of witchcrafts. So it excels in witchcraft. And we're told it sells nations through her whoredoms and families through her witchcrafts. How many people have died because of the wars that are perpetrated? The wars that may not even be based on the facts on the ground, but that are just based on rumors, that are based on lies, and people die under the pretext of trying to protect the citizens of various nations. When actually, the main reason why the wars are perpetrated is because these countries want to dominate other countries and want to control their resources. We are told about well-favored harlot. And this is said to be involved in whoredom. We know a whore is and how a whore behaves. A whore is not attached to one man. Prostitutes are in business for money. So this is how this nation is actually described. It's more like a prostitute that is only interested in money. And it's got so many friends. It gets something from all these friends in exchange for a friendship that it offers them. And we're told that it sells nations through whoredom and families through witchcrafts. So apparently, this particular harlot is not only involved in whoredom, but it's also involved in witchcraft. And we know that if there are nations that are so entrenched in secret societies, it is these developed nations, the Western nations. And it's because of this entrenchment in the secret societies that most of the evil is taking place in these countries. And it's the same evil that is spreading across the world, all because of the secret organizations to which these nations actually subscribe. You find that even most of our leaders in the world today, they subscribe to one secret organization or another. And we're taught what is being talked about here, that is whoredom, or harlotry, and witchcraft, are what have resulted in the wars, and what have led to multitudes of people being slain. Okay? So, this is a description of the bloody city. And now, because of its involvement in the occult, because of its involvement in whoredom, because of its involvement in witchcraft or secret societies, most of the people have died. And there are so many wars that are raging in the world today. I'm sure we can make the connections, and we can see that actually this prophecy is clearly depicting what is happening at this time. Filthy, polluted, oppressing, antitypical Nineveh. Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 1. Woe to her that is filthy and polluted, to the oppressing city. The city here pointed out is Nineveh, the capital city of ancient Assyria. So you can see that this city refers to the capital city of Assyria. It is actually Nineveh, okay? And it's the same city that we've been talking about as the bloody city. Zephaniah 2 verse 15. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. How is she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in, Everyone that passes by her shall hiss and wag his head. So Nineveh is described as the oppressing city. And it goes on to say that this city is actually a rejoicing city, and it dwells carelessly. And in its heart it says, I am, and there is none beside me. It talks about the people that are in control. The people who are not afraid of anything. Afraid people. That is what this talks about. And we are told, how is she become a desolation? So this first city of Nineveh, this oppressing city of Nineveh, the rejoicing city, will be destroyed, and it will become a place for beasts to lie down in. And everyone that will pass by her shall hiss and wag his hand. So we follow it. The capital city of Assyria, the power that rules the people of God, is to become a desolation. This Nineveh is evidently the antitype of ancient Nineveh. So the oppressing city we are talking about, the city of Nineveh, is actually the antitype of ancient Nineveh. Just like we talked about those four nations being antitypes of other nations, or types rather of other nations that were going to arise after the birth of Christ. We are told here that the Nineveh, the capital city of ancient Assyria, the one being discussed in Zephaniah chapter 3 and chapter 2, is actually the antitype of ancient Nineveh. No healing of Assyria's bruise. The wound is grievous. Nahum 3 verse 16 to 19. Thou hast multiplied thy merchants above the stars of heaven. The cankerworm spoileth and fleeth away. So the nations being talked about here has multiplied its merchants. So many merchants, so many traders, more than the stars of heaven. And it's further said to spoil, and after it spoils, it flees away. It's referred to as the cankerworm because it's got the same behavior as the cankerworm, the same behavior as the locusts. Thy crowned, or in this instance the underlords, as the locusts, and thy captains as the great grasshoppers, which come to the hedges in the cold day. But when the sun arises, they flee away, and their place is not known where they are. They are lovers of ease and of pleasure. So this is how the Bible describes the underlords. It's how it describes the respected people in these realms, the realms of modern Assyria. It says, or compares them to locusts, compares them to grasshoppers. And the reason it does this is because these people tend to camp in the hedges in the cold day. So if the conditions, when the weather rather is unfavorable, when the political situation is bad, when the business is not moving as expected, then you won't hear much from these people. They'll be hiding somewhere in their homes. It goes on to say, but when the sun arises, they flee away, and their place is not known where they are. They are lovers of ease and of pleasure. When their lives face sunshine, it becomes a different story. They'll be all over and everywhere. The tourists, they'll be in business trips. They'll be involved in all sorts of things. They'll be visiting pleasure resorts. But when there's war, when there are rumors that things are not okay, then you will find them gathering at airports, trying to flee back to their lands, to go and camp in the hedges, because the day has become cold. And when the sun arises, you'll see them at the airports again, flying all over the world, with different pleasure resorts. The grasshoppers, the locusts. It goes on to say, thy shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Thy nobles shall dwell in the dust. Thy people is scattered upon the mountains, and no one gathereth them. So apparently, the shepherds of Assyria have slumbered, they are sleeping. And the nobles of Assyria will someday dwell in the dust. They will be humbled. Thy people is scattered upon the mountains, and no man gathers them. So the people of Assyria are scattered upon the mountains. And when we go to Daniel chapter 9, as Daniel was praying for Jerusalem, he mentioned that as I prayed for the mountain of the Lord, indicating that when we talk about the mountain, we're actually talking about the church of God. So the people within the borders of Assyria are scattered all over the churches or the mountains, and there's no single man was bothered to gather them. So the shepherds of Assyria are fast asleep, and they don't bother where their sheep are. The sheep are scattered all over. There is no healing of thy bruise. Thy wound is grievous. All that hear the bruise of thee shall clap their hands over thee. Upon whom has not thy wickedness passed continually? We are told that at the demise of Assyria, the people will clap their hands. Because apparently, the wickedness of Assyria has passed continually upon them. And when Assyria falls, these nations will be very happy and they will clap their hands because they suffered a lot under Assyria's rule. Or they have suffered a lot under Assyria's rule. Such that when Assyria falls, they'll be so happy and they'll clap their hands at Assyria's demise. Chariots shall run like lightning, or cars shall run like lightning. Now, chapter 2, verse 3 and verse 4. The shield of his mighty man is made red. The valiant men are in scarlet. The chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of his preparation, and the fir trees shall be terribly shaken. The chariots shall rage in the streets, they shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches, they shall run like the lightnings. We are now talking about vehicular traffic in the realm of Assyria. And we are told that there's someone who's preparing themselves. And the shield of his mighty men will be made red. His valiant men will be in scarlet. And the chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of his preparation. And the fir trees shall be terribly shaken. So these are the conditions that will prevail at the time someone prepares themselves for war. The vehicles will have flaming torches in its day. And they'll run like lightning. And at that time the fir trees will be terribly shaken. And when the Bible talks about fir trees, it's not necessarily talking about the trees, but rather it's talking about the high-ranking officials in various governments. They talk about the presidents or the leaders generally. Okay, so the leaders will be terribly shaken at the time someone prepares for war. The chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. They shall run like the lightnings. So the vehicular traffic will be so developed, and the ways or the streets will be so broad that these vehicles will be crashing against each other on the broad ways. And they shall look like torches as they whiz past, or they cruise past. And they shall run like the lightnings, meaning the vehicles within the realm of Assyria, at the time somebody prepares for war, shall run at unprecedented speeds, and they shall seem like lightnings. So these are the conditions that will prevail when somebody prepares for war. Since this prophecy meets its fulfillment in the day when the chariots are with flaming torches, when they run like lightning, when they jostle one against another in the highways and in the broadways, and since the automotive traffic of today completely and perfectly answers the prophet's description of it, then there is no other conclusion but that the day in which we are now living is the day in which Nahum's prophecy is to be fulfilled. So this prophecy will be fulfilled at the time these conditions prevail. It could have been fulfilled, or it was fulfilled, and it will be fulfilled at the time these conditions prevail. So, when the conditions described in this prophecy prevail, then somebody will be preparing for war. And we are told that the fir trees shall be terribly shaken. the top leadership of the various governments or countries shall be terribly shaken when somebody prepares for war, when somebody starts war. War is captured in the things of God. Thus far, it's seen that the Assyria of this chapter represents a people who have been well instructed in the things of God, the law, and the sanctuary. So, we've been taught that the shepherds have slumbered in Assyria, and the people are scattered upon the mountains. So the implication is that Assyria, or the Assyria being talked about, represents a people who have been well instructed in the things of God, the law, and the sanctuary. They are people who know the gospel very, very well. So that is where the church of God is found. That is within the realms of Assyria. But instead of obeying the Lord and ruling justly and righteously, they have greatly transgressed, have gone down into sin as deep as any people can possibly go. So that's the paradox. We have people who are well instructed in the word of God, but these people have not bothered to live according to what they know, but rather have greatly transgressed and have gone down into sin as deep as any people can possibly go. So this is one of the hallmarks of the inhabitants of Assyria. Though they know the Lord, yet they do not obey the Lord. They do not follow in his footsteps, but they do something else, as though they've never heard the word of the Lord. They've greatly transgressed, but they've gone down into sin as deep as any people can possibly go. That's one of the characteristics of Assyria. And that is why other religions do not take Christianity that seriously, because they've realized, though we know so much, yet we do not live up to our profession. History repeats itself. The one power, being called Assyria, has a hereditary title, which reveals that it is the modern counterpart of the once widespread empire of ancient Assyria. Even as modern Babylon, Revelation chapter 17, verse 5, is the modern counterpart of ancient Babylon. So, in this prophecy, we are told one of the powers has a hereditary title of Assyria. And we are told that this power is actually a modern counterpart of the once widespread empire of ancient Assyria, something that I've already alluded to. All these counterparts then are about another scriptural intimation and confirmation of the age-old truth that history repeats itself on a much broader scale than in the original. So we are very soon going to witness the repetition of history once again, just like it was repeated some time back during the Dark Ages. So this is what is going to happen. There's going to be a repetition of history, just like it was repeated, or like it happened in the past. Exists in time of the end. From this, we see that the Assyria under discussion exists in the time of the end, the time in which the great and dreadful day of the Lord takes place. So Assyria will exist in the time of the end, that is, in the time the great and dreadful day of the Lord takes place. This Assyria, therefore, is an antitype of ancient Assyria, just as the Babylon of Revelation 17 and 18 is an antitype of ancient Babylon. So the Assyria being discussed here represents ancient Assyria. It is just an antitype. So meaning, it's not necessarily the same Assyria that existed in the past, but is more like the substance, whereas the Assyria of old can be regarded as the shadow. So whatever happened in old times is going to be repeated through modern Assyria. Assyria, church's inspiration, is a rejoicing city that dwells carelessly, that says in our heart, I am, and there is none beside me. So, the Assyria we're talking about, like prophecy says, is a rejoicing city, and it dwells carelessly. It says in our heart, I am, and there is none beside me. Our people scattered, drew not near to her God. Nahum 1 verse 1 and 3 verse 18. Thy shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Thy nobles shall dwell in the dust. Thy people is scattered upon the mountains, and no man gathereth them. So this is Assyria. Her shepherds are fast asleep, and their nobles shall dwell in the dust. They shall be humiliated. And the people of Assyria are scattered upon the mountains, and there is no man that gathers them. This talks about the multiplicity of religious denominations within Assyria. If there is a religion that has got so many sects, so many groupings, it is Christianity. And Christianity is found within the realms of Assyria, within the Western world, within Protestant capitalist nations. That is why you've got so many denominations. So people are divided based on which denominations they belong to. So they are scattered upon the mountains, and there is no man that gathers them. They are not one. They are found in different denominations. She obeyed not the voice. She received not correction. She trusted not in the Lord. She drew not near to her God. That is Assyria. She obeyed not the voice. She received not correction. She trusted not in the Lord. And she drew not near to her God, though she professes to know the Lord. This verse points out the fact that the city and nation here mentioned had the privilege of hearing the voice of inspiration, of knowing God's truth, but has failed to take heed, received not correction, trusted not in the Lord, drew not near to her God. That is Assyria. This is what actually describes modern Assyria. They only make a profession of religion, but they don't abide by what the Bible says, or what the Word of God says. Prophecy meets its fulfillment in our day. Now, in view of the truth that we are living in such a period as described by Nahum, together with the fact that preparations for Nahum's war are made during a time of such lightning-like travel, so in view of this, in view of the fact that we are living in such a period as described by Nahum, and together with the fact that preparations for Nahum's war are made during a time of such lightning-like travel, in view of all this, the evidence clearly stands out that Nahum's prophecy is to meet its fulfillment in our day, and that the Assyria here in prophecy, therefore, is not ancient Assyria, but another widespread power that exists in the time of the end, the time in which its yoke is removed from God's people. So we see that the fulfillment of Nahum's prophecy about Assyria will make its fulfillment in these days, in the days we're living in. And it further shows that Assyria, being referred to in this prophecy, is not ancient Assyria, but another widespread power that exists in the time of the end, in our time. The time in which its yoke is removed from God's people. So this Assyria will exist at a time when the yoke will be removed from God's people. So meaning God's people are under slavery. They are in bondage, but the time is nearing when this yoke is going to be removed from God's people. So the nation that exists in the time of the end, which has subjugated God's people or God's church, is what this Assyria refers to, a nation in which the church of God is found. Backslidden Christian power confederate with pagan power. Necessarily then, there must be found in the Christian dispensation a backslidden Christian power, which is referred to as Israel, confederated with a pagan one, which is referred to as Syria, to the end of assimilating or annihilating the Orthodox Christians, or in this case are referred to as Judah. So we see how the prophecy is being applied. And this prophecy is still explaining the prophecy of Isaiah. So we are told there's going to be backsliding Christian power, or there was a backsliding Christian power that is during the Christian dispensation, which is referred to as Israel, which will confederate with the pagan power, which is referred to as Syria. And their goal will be to assimilate or annihilate Orthodox Christians, who in this instance are referred to as Judah. And the only such confederacy in the Christian era, now we are talking about the confederacy which existed during the Christian era, our time, was the unholy union of church and state. So this actually refers to the unholy union of church and state, which ruled during the Dark Ages. We know the Dark Ages of religion, when the papacy ascended to power. So there's a confederacy in the sense that the church and the state came together to work as one, and which sought the destruction of the born again who refused to depart from the apostolic faith and submit to a Christian, pagan, or Israel-Syrian confederacy. So these people wanted to destroy the Orthodox Christians or the born again Christians who refused to depart from the apostolic faith and submit to a Christian, pagan confederacy. And the Christian pagan confederacy, which came into existence at the time Rome, through the papacy, ascended the throne, is actually what can be referred to as the Israel-Syria confederacy. So I'm sure we can see how the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 7 and 8 falls into place. This explains what happened. And that is the confederacy which the Bible refers to. Assyria, power which broke up church-state union. Now let's look at Assyria as the power which broke up the church-state union. Just like in the Bible, it was Assyria that came and scattered the two nations of Israel and Syria when they came up with a confederacy. So it destroyed or brought to an end that confederacy, and then it scattered the inhabitants of those two nations to other parts of the Syrian realm. Shall we proceed? Foretelling to Daniel the work of this wicked power. So we're talking about the Christian pagan confederacy that existed during the Dark Ages, or the church-state confederacy that existed during the Dark Ages. So when Daniel foretold the work of this wicked power, the angel declared. So it's the angel that actually foretold this to Daniel. Okay? So he declared, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand, until time and times, and the dividing of time. So this is a prophecy that was given to Daniel about the church-state union that existed during the Dark Ages. As a natural consequence, therefore, the type, ancient Assyria, finds its double in the power which in the Middle Ages broke up that church-state union. So now we can see that there was a power which broke up the church-state union in the Middle Ages. So the church-state union of the Dark Ages was broken by some power during the Dark or the Middle Ages. Okay? So that power which broke up that church-state union is what is referred to as modern Assyria. So this is what this implies. And as that union was dissolved by the present Protestant nations, so the church-state union was dissolved by the present Protestant nations. And the conclusion inescapably follows that modern Assyria reaches down to our day. So you can see that Assyria refers to Protestant nations, the present Protestant nations, because it is the Protestants that broke up the church-state union of the Dark Ages. Allies and Hitler. Now, since it is a known fact that Great Britain and France were not prepared to fight Hitler when he opened up his guns against them, and as everyone of the Allies began to prepare themselves mightily after Hitler started to dash in pieces, the truth stands out as clear as crystal that, so since we know from history that Great Britain and France were not prepared to fight Hitler when he opened up his guns against them, and also that as every one of the Allies began to prepare themselves mightily after Hitler started to dash in pieces, then the truth stands out as clear as crystal that he who dashes in pieces is none other than Hitler, the one that was ready at the commencement of the war the one who broke in several pieces Germany itself, the British Empire, and many other countries. The allies, therefore, must be the antitypical Assyria. So this tells us two things. It tells us that the one who dashes in pieces, according to the prophecy of Nahum, and the one who was actually ready at the commencement of the Second World War, and who broke in several pieces Germany itself, the British Empire, and many other countries, is actually Hitler. And then it goes on to say that the Allies, therefore, represent antitypical Assyria. So the Allies are what represent antitypical Assyria. So these are supposed to be the Protestant nations. And we know we're talking about the British Empire, we talk about France, and all those countries that were on the side of Britain, that is including the United States. All those can be referred to as antitypical Assyria. And this prophecy of Assyria actually is talking about those nations. Characteristics by which modern Assyria is identified. So what are some of the characteristics that would tell us who modern Assyria is? Let us run through them. 1. As man looks at things, she is so great that there is none like her. She is well instructed in the things of God. So there's no other country that you can compare to this particular nation of Assyria. She's so great. And then, we also need to know that this Assyria is well instructed in the things of God. It's not a heathen nation. It's a nation that knows the Lord, and it is very well instructed in the things of God. Number 2, she is oppressive, a hard ruling nation. It's a nation that believes that might is right. They do as they please. Therefore, because of certain principles that they subscribe to, Assyria is actually an oppressive and a hard ruling nation. Number 3, she has polluted the sanctuary and has declared the law of God void. So though she's well instructed in the things of God, she has actually polluted the sanctuary, meaning she has distorted the word of God, or she doesn't actually obey the Lord, or the word of the Lord, and has actually declared the law of God void, meaning it's breaking God's commandments, or some of God's commandments, and hence has declared them void. It doesn't abide by what the law of God teaches or requires of us. 4, she has piled up wealth by going after it as an evening wolf goes after its prey. Okay? So this nation has amassed a lot of wealth by going after it as an evening wolf goes after its prey. So I may not have covered this in the presentation. I may not have talked about the actual verse that talks about this, but in our own private study, I'm sure you will go through the Bible, especially the book of Nahum, and you'll find where it talks about the evening wolf. Okay? So it talks about a den where it keeps its treasures. So all that is in reference to Assyria and how it has actually amassed a lot of wealth by going after it as an evening wolf. She obeys the church of God. So the church of God is also found in Assyria. She exists in the time the Lord is to manifest his power and destroy all the wicked nations. So that is another thing that we need to bear in mind. This nation will exist in the time the Lord is to manifest his power and destroy all the wicked nations. That is when Assyria will exist, the time in which Assyria will exist. And 7, she is an Assyria-like nation, widespread, a nation of conquests. So Assyria is actually a nation of conquests, and we know that Assyria was involved in the slave trade. We know Assyria was involved in colonialism, and we know Assyria is involved in neo-colonialism, which is taking place currently. So these are the characteristics that tell us or help us pinpoint who Assyria is. And I'm sure it becomes clear to us just who modern Assyria is. We know that it's actually the Western nations and their allies.